A recent poll for the Mirror and the Express put Reform on its highest vote share yet of 21%, and leading the Tories by an unusual 3%. And this is also a consistent week-by-week increase for Reform, with a corresponding decrease for the Tories, as you would expect, but also a decrease for Labour, which you might not expect. So, poll for the Mirror on the one side and the Express on the other, and the headline numbers: Reform on 21% is comfortably ahead of the Tories on 18 and Labour on 38. And worth noticing maybe that if you switch all the Tory votes into the Reform votes, you get a Unite the Right, which is 1% ahead of Labour. And this is a consistent improvement over 6 weeks. 6 weeks ago, Reform a lowly 13%, Labour 44% and Tory 24%. Then, by 31st of May, Reform even lower on 11%, Labour still 44% and Tories still 24%. The following Monday is when Farage announced he was standing in Clacton. 7th of June, Reform now 16%, Labour falls to 42% and Tories fall to 22%, so Farage standing cost both Labour and Tories 2% according to this. A week later, Reform up to 17%, Labour down another at 41% and Tories down 3% at 19%, so Reform is starting to catch up. 21st of June, Reform big jump to 20%, Labour fall to 39%, Tories still 19%, so this is the week that Reform took second place in the vote share in these polls. 28th of June, Reform now 21%, another 1% up, Labour 38%, so another point down, and Tories 18%, which is where we started, with Reform leading the Tories by 3% and comfortably in second place. So this was 6 weeks ago. Tories on 24%, Labour on 44%, Libs on 8%, did you forget about them, and Reform on 13%. And now Tories and Labour have both fallen by 6%, Libs up 3%, and Reform up a whopping 8%. Before, after. If they can squeeze another point up to 22 on Thursday, they should really get a few seats. And this would appear to be something which the Tories are happy to do just about anything to stop. Second Reform candidate quits and backs Tories over racism and misogyny, one Geordie David, and this is she. She says, "I am hereby announcing my decision to leave the Reform Party and stand down as their candidate for West Ham and Beckton with immediate effect. I am in no doubt that the party and its senior leadership are not racist, as the vast majority of candidates are indeed racist, misogynistic and bigoted. I do not wish to be directly associated with people who hold such views that are so vastly opposing to my own and what I stand for." This is very odd, not least considering comments such as this from Dan Wootton, formerly of GB News. "Senior Reform sources have told me today that numerous candidates have been approached and offered enticements, including safe council seats, if they publicly condemn Nigel Farage's party and defect to the Tories." But if it was you sitting back and watching something like that turn into something like that over the course of around 40 days or so, might such skullduggery possibly flit through your mind also? West Ham and Beckton is a new constituency in London, combining parts of East Ham and West Ham. East and West Ham were around 75% Labour in 2019, Conservatives on about 15%, and nobody else anywhere. So West Ham and Beckton is going to be more like 80% plus for Labour on Thursday. Nobody who is not Labour is going to have a prayer in West Ham and Beckton, and the Reform candidate is entirely tokenistic, there to fulfil the promise of standing a candidate everywhere. Reform Central is not planning on inviting Georgie David to Canapé's Shay Nige at any point. How would anyone, even a senior party member, know that the vast majority of candidates are indeed racist, misogynistic and bigoted, much less one as entirely on the sidelines as Georgie David? And how did it happen that this omniscient Reform candidate, a group of people not generally known for their affection for divisive left-wing grievance vocabulary, end up plastering her resignation statement with divisive left-wing grievance vocabulary like racist, misogynistic and bigoted? That's not a Reform candidate. That is somebody reading from a script which she doesn't know doesn't sound like a Reform candidate because she's not a Reform candidate. And somebody senior, as suggested by Dan Wootton above, had this to say.
She's never met anybody else. She's never met any of our other candidates. She's no idea what she's talking about. She's never complained to anybody in the party. She came to us very late, just before the election, saying, please can I stand for you? I'm furious with the Tories. I want to do a great job with you.
But for once, you don't need a complex exercise of conspiratorial joining the dots to work this one out. Certain people were looking at that and were none too happy about it, but then they found themselves looking at that and they stopped being none too happy about it, started panicking about it, and set about thinking up ways to tackle the problem. But since nobody is likely to fall for such transparent skullduggery, the ones who went from being also-rans to being the official opposition in terms of vote share and taking votes from both leading parties should probably pat themselves on the back for a job well done.